That has not been taken up by the provincial government, but it's as far as the UBCM president and the other individuals, other mayors that participated in that report, there's every intention of keeping on pursuing that, because there's certainly an issue about downloading, and the cost to municipalities is not going down, it's going up. And there's a very, very intent purpose in pursuing that. We had a very interesting presentation from the BC Association of Chiefs of Police, and I'm going to read you just, I'll count the issues, the emerging issues for the police forces, RCMP, and city police forces in British Columbia. And these are what they called emergent issues. First one was vulnerable persons. That is becoming a big issue. The second one was the need for increased transparency by the police, and they're aware of that. The third issue was addiction. The fourth issue was cannabis, and what the future of cannabis might be like when the federal government decides what they're going to do about cannabis. And then cybercrime is taking on more and more of an issue. And then lastly, oddly enough, officer wellness, police officer wellness. That's becoming people that are suffering from, what do I want to call it, PTSD. That's becoming more and more of an issue for all police forces. And one of the things that the police force mentioned to us is that they also are getting into more and more delivery of service. They're looking as first responders. I want to talk a little more about that in terms of harm reduction. There was a big issue in Vancouver, especially with ambulance drivers and police officers and firefighters. So I want to look into that. We're going to be doing that at the city level, and looking at, we have a harm reduction organization out of Nanaimo that we're going to be meeting with, because the province is the first ones to say, well, your ideal responders are your first responders, your firefighters, your police officers, and your ambulance drivers. So, here we go. It's going to be more work and more effort on all our parts, but it makes sense that these first responders are people that can do a great deal to help us with regards to harm reduction. The next item we talked about was healthcare delivery, and we all have the same problems, no matter how big and how small the cities and towns might be. Healthcare is a big issue. One of the things that I've brought to the attention since I've been back to the Perfect Storm meeting group that we have here in Oceanside is the fact that they have physician assistants, which I had never heard of. And they were talking about this, and there was a resolution at the convention about the provincial government sanctioning and training physician assistants, which could help. I don't know enough about it yet. I've put some feelers out there to learn about it some more, but the initial feedback I'm getting from the folk here at Island Health and others is that that's something we should look into. And lastly, following up on Councillor Oates' comments, infrastructure funding, that's going to be a very interesting issue. I want to get a hold of our MLA as soon as I can and talk about this whole issue of infrastructure funding. The federal government was there saying they're going to give us $450 million to BC for water and sewage treatments. We'd like some more money. We need some more money. I know at the regional district of Nanaimo level, we're going to be doing something about the plant, the sewage treatment plant over here in French Creek. So we're going to get busy on that and work with the provincial government very closely to see how and when and where we can get money with that regard. So all in all, to say that it looks to me, Mrs. Comis and myself, and I think Councillor Oates were at a meeting on tent cities, and Minister Coleman was there. We heard from Mr. Coleman that they're prepared to provide all kinds of funding, capital funding, operational funding, because they recognize it's a problem. And the message that I got, and I won't speak for others that were there, but the message I got was you'd better deal with these issues of addiction and homelessness first, because otherwise you might end up with a tent city like they did in Victoria. And they resolved the problems in Victoria fairly quickly. They renovated older hotels, and they renovated apartment buildings that they went ahead and bought right away, and got everybody that wanted to be housed, got everybody housed. But it doesn't minimize the problems you've talked about. Finding housing is one thing. Getting people to want to come and live in housing is another. And the challenges are great. But the message for me as mayor in the city of Parksville and living in Oceanside, I think is we better get on to this sooner than later, because we don't want to be playing catch-up ball with regards to what could happen in terms of looking after those who are not as fortunate as a lot of us are. So I'll leave that with you. I don't know, Mrs. Comas, do you want to add something to that? You took copious notes, which is good. Councillor Rhodes, do you want to add something? Go right ahead.
Not to the tent city one. That was a very sobering one. Other than I will comment that the minister does seem to have a heart. One of the things that he spoke about a few times was that these people are people and they're God's creatures, and we should be looking at it like that. And the argument on a harm reduction, there's no argument that harm reduction strategies do work. But what I wanted to speak about, why I put my hand up, is because you spoke about policing. I attended a session down there. It was called The Cost of Public Safety. And there was a very strong warning sent to municipalities about what's coming down the pipe with respect to the RCMP. As we know, the RCMP recently won the right to unionize. That session was comparing the wages of RCMP officers relative to city police officers across the country. And the statistics they provided showed that, generally speaking, RCMP officers could be paid anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 below what their counterparts are. I foresee the time when the RCMP do gain their own union, that they will be coming forward looking for pay equity with their counterparts in the other city police forces. And I would suggest that if we've got 16 or 18 officers here and we had to increase each one of those by 20 or 30 grand, that would be a financial impact that would be very, very difficult for the city of Parksville to absorb. And I think it's going to be a national issue for our police forces as well. I thought it was very sobering when they showed the salaries of the first responders and the fire and the police. They seem to be relatively close to each other, and then the RCMP are down here. So I think that's coming at some point, and that's something that we'll have to, in addition to us hitting the 15,000 mark and our increment going up, we also need to be thinking about in the future increased labor costs there and how we're going to achieve that. And there was quite a lively debate on the last day of convention about how policing should be funded between the rural and the urban areas. So I neglected to mention that earlier, but I think it's important that we recognize that somewhere down the road we may have an increased labor cost there.
Thank you. I was in the front of the room, so I didn't see you. You must have been a little further back. I think when they showed the graph, it was kind of you wanted to reach for your heart, because the graph was going up like this for policing and first responders. But the other thing on that very point, which was really quite interesting, I guess we could talk all night about it, but we won't, ladies and gentlemen, I promise you. But the firefighters there, they had these arbitration decisions, and the name of the game is that if you live in Horse's Ankle, British Columbia, with a population of 5,000, and I don't know if there's such a place, but somebody give me the name of a real small community. Anyway, if living in that part of British Columbia, and if you're living in Vancouver, the arbitrators have decided that the firefighter in Horse's Ankle and the firefighter in Vancouver are entitled to the same wage. And they've been those arbitration decisions have been fairly consistent, which is quite surprising. So if you want to make the argument the lawyers that were there, if you want to make the argument that your living costs are cheaper, and the beat goes on, your living costs are cheaper, your travel costs are cheaper, the number of occurrences are less than you have in a big city, those arguments don't seem to fly. And they've been fighting these arbitration decisions now in a lot of communities, and I forget the example of the community that they used, which was a small community, pardon me? Vernon versus Vancouver, and it's simply the arbitrators simply ignored that cost of living factor, which would enable a much smaller city like Vernon to pay their firefighters less than they're paying in Vancouver. So stay tuned, folks. It's going to become an interesting situation, and the discussions we're going to have on budgets is going to become more and more important.